I didn't realize how far I'd walked until I found the toddler's shoe sitting perfectly upright on a mossy log, miles from any trailhead. I was solo hiking in the Olympic National Forest, which seemed like a good idea at the time. I wanted to get away from the noise, you know? The weirdest part about that shoe wasn't just that it was there. It was that the laces were tied in a double knot, and the leather looked brand new, like it had just been placed there 5 minutes ago. I'd been out there for 3 days and hadn't seen a single soul. Honestly, the silence in those deep woods starts to play tricks on your head after a while. I decided to keep moving, thinking maybe a family was just ahead of me, but the trail started getting narrow. I mean, it wasn't even a real trail anymore, just a small gap between the massive pines. About a mile past the shoe, I noticed something else. A bright red windbreaker was draped over a low branch. I stopped and called out, thinking someone might be hurt. No one answered. It was just a wind through the needles. I walked over to the jacket and saw a small pile of granola bars on the ground underneath it. They weren't scattered. They were stacked in a neat little pyramid. It felt wrong, like a trap or some kind of weird marker. I looked around, and for the first time, I realized how quiet it really was. No birds, no squirrels, just me and these items that shouldn't be there. I checked my GPS, but the signal was completely dead. I decided to head back toward my base camp before the sun started to drop. That's when I heard the first whistle. It was short and high-pitched. It sounded like it was coming from right behind the tree I'd just passed. I turned around, but there was nothing. Just more trees. I started walking faster. I told myself it was probably just a bird I didn't recognize. But then I heard a second whistle. This time it was from the left. It felt like someone was signaling to someone else. I didn't look back again. I just kept my eyes on the ground and moved. I needed to get back to my tent. I didn't want to be out here when it got late. The woods felt different now. They felt crowded. I kept thinking about that shoe. It was just too clean. I remembered hearing about people going missing in this area. Usually it's just people getting lost. But this didn't feel like a person who was lost. It felt like a person who was waiting for me to find them. I reached my campsite right as the light began to fade. I felt a bit better seeing my tent, but when I zipped it open, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. My sleeping bag was gone. In its place was a single small sock. It matched the toddler's shoe. I stood there staring at it. Someone had been inside my tent. Someone was playing a game. I felt the hair on my neck stand up as I realized I wasn't alone. I just stood there listening to the trees. The silence was heavy. And then I heard the third whistle. It was coming from right inside the tent. I didn't know what to do next. I just knew I was in trouble. Deep trouble. I felt the cold air.
I sat there in the dirt, clutching my bear spray, realizing that the snapping sound in the brush wasn't an animal. It was the rhythm of a person walking. I didn't have my sleeping bag, so the night was going to be cold. But I wasn't thinking about the temperature. I was thinking about the fact that someone had taken my gear and left a child's sock in its place. It was such a specific, weird thing to do. I kept my headlamp off. I didn't want to be a beacon in the middle of the woods. Every time the wind picked up, the trees would groan and I'd jump. Then, about an hour into the night, I heard it again. That same whistle from earlier. It was closer this time. It came from the ridge just above my camp. I crawled out of my tent and pressed my back against a large hemlock. I stared into the gray shapes of the forest, waiting for my eyes to adjust. That's when I noticed a light. It wasn't a flashlight. It was a small orange glow, like a single cigarette ember, moving slowly through the trees. It was about 50 yards away. It would move a few feet, stop, and then move again. It felt like someone was pacing. I wanted to yell, to tell them to back off, but my throat felt like it was full of sand. I just watched that little orange dot. Then the whistling started again. But it wasn't just one person. A second whistle answered from the opposite side of the camp. They were talking to each other. I realized then that I was being surrounded. This wasn't some random hiker. This was coordinated. I felt this heavy weight in my chest, like the air had gotten thicker. I decided I couldn't stay in the tent. It was a coffin if they decided to move in. I grabbed my pack, which I'd luckily kept with me, and started to crawl. I didn't go toward the trail. I knew they'd be watching the main path. Instead, I headed deeper into the thicket, moving as slowly as I could. I'd move an inch, wait, and listen. I could hear them talking now. Not words, just low mumbles and clicks. It sounded like they were looking for something, or someone. I found a small rock overhang and squeezed myself under it. I stayed there for what felt like hours. My legs were cramping, but I didn't dare move. Then I heard footsteps right above my head. Someone was standing on the rock I was hiding under. I could hear the grit of their boots on the stone. I held my breath until my lungs burned. They stayed there for a long time, just standing, waiting for me to make a sound. I just closed my eyes and prayed they wouldn't look down. I felt the cold air pressing against my face. I realized that they knew exactly where I was the entire time. They were just waiting for the right moment to finish the game. The fear was real now. I had to move. I had to leave now.
The sun finally started to bleed through the canopy, but the light didn't make me feel any better when I saw the circle of rocks that had been built around my hiding spot overnight. I hadn't heard them doing it. That was the part that really messed with me. I'd been awake the whole time, yet somehow they had managed to place dozens of flat stones in a perfect ring around the overhang while I was sitting right there. It was like a message. I knew I had to get out of there right then. I didn't care about my tent or the rest of my gear. I just needed to reach the logging road about 5 miles to the east. I started moving, trying to be fast but quiet. The woods felt different in the morning light. Everything looked like a person, every stump, every shadow. After about 20 minutes of hiking, I stumbled into a small clearing that wasn't on my map. In the center of the clearing was a massive pile of clothes. I'm talking hundreds of items. Jackets, hats, boots, even backpacks. Most of them are old and faded, covered in moss and dirt. But on the very top of the pile, I saw something familiar. It was my blue sleeping bag. It was laid out flat, perfectly neat, and right next to it was a pair of glasses. I recognized them instantly. They belonged to a hiker who had gone missing in this park 3 years ago. I'd seen his face on the news for months. This wasn't just a campsite. This was a collection. I realized then that people don't just disappear out here. They are taken, and they are kept. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. I looked around the clearing and saw something even worse. There were small hand-carved wooden dolls hanging from the trees by fishing line. Dozens of them. They were all shaped like people. Some of them had actual hair glued to their heads. Human hair. I backed away from the pile, my heart hammering against my ribs. I turned to run, but I stopped dead. Sitting on a stump at the edge of the clearing was a man. He wasn't some wild man with a beard. He was wearing a clean flannel shirt and jeans. He was just sitting there, whittling a piece of wood. He didn't look up at me. He just kept carving. But then he started to whistle. It was the same high-pitched sound from the night before. I didn't wait for him to look at me. I just bolted into the thick brush. I heard him stand up behind me. I didn't look back. I just ran. I didn't care where. I just had to get out. My heart was pounding hard. I could hear them crashing through the undergrowth behind me, not even trying to be quiet anymore, their whistles echoing off the trees like some kind of twisted hunt. I didn't look back. I knew if I looked back, I'd lose my footing, and that would be the end of it. My lungs were screaming. I could feel the branches tearing at my face and arms, but I didn't stop. The whistling was coming from all sides now. They were hurting me. I realized they weren't trying to catch me yet. They were pushing me towards something. I saw a break in the trees ahead and thought it was the road. I pushed myself harder, my legs feeling like lead. But when I burst through the tree line, I wasn't on a road. I was standing at the edge of a steep ravine. It was a drop of at least 50 feet to the rocky creek below. I skidded to a stop, my boots sending gravel tumbling over the edge. I turned around, gasping for air. The whistling stopped. The woods went completely silent. Then they started to step out from behind the trees. There were 4 of them, 3 men and 1 woman. They all looked like normal people. They looked like hikers you'd see at a trailhead.
but their eyes were empty. They weren't saying anything. They just stood in a semicircle, blocking my only way out. The man from the clearing was in the center. He held up the small wooden doll he'd been carving. It was finished now. It was wearing a tiny blue backpack, just like mine. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He took a step toward me. I looked at the ravine behind me and then back at them. I realized then why so many people go missing out here. It's not because they get lost. It's because they find something they weren't supposed to see. I gripped the strap of my pack and took a deep breath. The man reached out his hand like he was offering me something. He whispered something I couldn't quite hear. I didn't wait to find out what it was. I stepped back, right off the edge of the cliff. As I fell, the last thing I saw was the four of them standing at the top, just watching me go. They didn't even look surprised. They just looked like they were waiting for the next one. I don't know how I'm still here, but I never went back. I'll never go back. Never again. I survived, but I'm still falling. I didn't realize someone was throwing a party in the middle of the backcountry until I stepped over a log and saw a bright yellow plastic toddler chair sitting in the center of a muddy creek bed. I was about 12 miles into the Great Smoky Mountains, way off the beaten path. Honestly, I was just looking for a good spot to filter some water before I set up my camp for the night. It was just weird. The chair looked brand new. No dirt on it, no scratches. I mean, it's not like someone just dropped it there. It was positioned perfectly, facing a tall, dead pine tree. I stood there for a second just looking at it. I noticed a small blue party hat sitting on the ground next to it. I remember thinking that some family must have hiked out here with their kid, which seemed insane given the terrain. But there were no footprints. The mud in the creek was smooth. I walked a bit further upstream, and that's when I saw the second one, a pink chair, then a green one. They were arranged in a circle about 20 feet apart. It felt off. The air in the woods felt heavy, like when you're in a library and you feel like someone is watching you from between the shelves. I decided to skip the water filter and just move on to my planned campsite. It was about 2 miles away, near a rocky outcrop. I kept looking over my shoulder, though. Every time a branch moved, I jumped. I finally reached the outcrop and set up my tent. I was exhausted. But when I reached into my pack to get my headlamp, I felt something cold and plastic. I pulled it out. It was a small plastic fork. It was bright yellow. It matched the first chair I saw. I hadn't put it there. Someone had been in my bag while I was looking at those chairs. I sat in my tent, clutching my knife. I just listened. The forest was too quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been invited to something I didn't want to attend. I kept looking at that yellow fork on the floor of my tent. It looked so bright against the gray fabric. It looked like a warning. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just waited for the sun. The silence was the worst part. Just me and the plastic. I kept thinking about the person who put it there, how close they must have been, how quiet they were. I just stared at the tent zipper, waiting for it to move. It never did, but the feeling stayed. It felt like a trap. I just sat there. I woke up because I heard the sound of someone blowing into one of those paper party whistles, the kind that unravels and makes a loud honk, right outside my tent flap. It was 2 a.m., and I hadn't seen another hiker in 2 days. My heart was basically trying to exit my chest. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. I just sat there in my sleeping bag, staring at the thin layer of nylon between me and whatever was standing out there. After about 10 seconds, I heard it again. Honk! It was a short, wet sound. Then I heard the crinkle of paper. It sounded like someone was unwrapping a gift right next to my head. I gripped my bear spray so hard my knuckles hurt. I mean, seriously, what is this? I thought. Then a voice whispered. It wasn't a growl or anything.
It was just a normal, calm man's voice. He said, "You forgot your cake." I felt the side of the tent dip, like someone was leaning their weight against it. I finally found my voice and yelled for them to get away. I told them I had a gun, even though I didn't. I heard the sound of footsteps retreating, not running, just walking, slow and steady, like they were strolling through a grocery store. I stayed awake until dawn, my eyes burning from the strain of staring into the gray. When the sun finally started to bleed through the trees, I unzipped the tent just enough to look out. Right in front of my door, there was a paper plate. On it was a single perfect slice of white cake with pink frosting. There were no bugs on it, no dirt. It looked like it had just come out of a box. And sticking out of the top was the yellow plastic fork from my bag. I didn't even pack my tent. I just threw my essentials in my pack and started running. I didn't care about the gear anymore. I just needed to get to the trailhead. I kept thinking about that voice. He sounded so polite, like he was actually disappointed I hadn't eaten. I kept looking back, expecting to see a guy in a suit or something. But there was only the trees and the silence. It was too much. I ran until I couldn't breathe. I just had to get out. I kept hearing that whistle in my head, just honking. I hated it. I just ran.
The sun came up and I found a Polaroid photo tucked into my boot, showing me sleeping in my tent from a top-down angle I couldn't explain. I didn't stay to pack my stove. I was moving so fast I was stumbling over roots, but I didn't stop. About 3 miles down the trail, I noticed something caught in the branches of a rhododendron. It was a red balloon. It was tied to a branch with a long white string. It was fully inflated, bobbing gently in the breeze. On the side of the balloon, someone had used a black marker to write a name. It said Michael. My name is Michael. I felt a wave of nausea that almost made me drop to my knees. I kept going, trying to stay on the main path, but a half-mile later there was another one, a blue balloon. This one had a date written on it. It was today's date. Looking back, I realized they were marking the miles for me. I started to see more things, a scattering of confetti on the forest floor, a single half-eaten sandwich sitting on a mossy rock. It was like a trail of breadcrumbs, but instead of leading me home, it was showing me that they were ahead of me. I tried to check my phone, but of course there was no signal. I felt so small in those woods, like an ant in a jar. I reached a junction in the trail and saw a large white poster board nailed to a tree. It was a guest list. There were about 20 names on it, all written in neat cursive handwriting. Most of them were crossed out with a single red line. At the very bottom of the list was my name. It wasn't crossed out yet. I looked at the names that were crossed out. I recognized some of them from the missing flyers I'd seen at the ranger station when I checked in. People who had vanished over the last 5 years. This wasn't a joke. This was a log. I realized that the party was just a way to keep track of the catch. I heard a branch snap to my left. I didn't wait to see who it was. I dove into the thicket, away from the trail. I didn't care about getting lost anymore. I just needed to not be where they expected me to be. I crawled through the briars. I kept my head down. I listened to the whistles. They were closer now. Much closer. I just hid. I waited. I finally reached the trailhead, but every single car in the parking lot had a single helium-filled red balloon tied to its antenna, swaying in the dead air. Mine was the only car with a happy birthday banner draped across the windshield. I stood at the edge of the woods, my chest heaving, just staring at the lot. It was completely empty of people. No hikers getting ready, no rangers, just the cars and the balloons. It looked like a graveyard for a carnival. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking so hard I dropped them twice in the gravel. I kept looking at the trees behind me. I knew they were there. They were just waiting for the party to end. I finally got my door open and dove inside. I locked the doors and started the engine. I didn't even look in the rearview mirror. I just threw it in reverse and floored it. As I was pulling out of the lot, I saw him. He was standing by the trailhead map, holding a bunch of balloons. He was wearing a high visibility vest, like a park employee. He didn't chase me. He didn't yell. He just raised one hand and waved. A slow, friendly wave. I drove for 3 hours before I finally stopped at a gas station. I went into the bathroom to wash the mud off my face. When I looked in the mirror, I noticed something sticking out of the side pocket of my backpack. It was a small handwritten envelope. I opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a card. It had a cartoon bear on the front. Inside, it said, "Thanks for coming. We'll see you at the next one." There was a small piece of dried skin taped to the bottom of the card. It had a mole on it that looked exactly like the one on my shoulder. I checked my shoulder. The skin was gone. I hadn't even felt them take it. I don't go to national parks anymore. I don't even like going into my own backyard after dark. I still have the card. I keep it to remind myself that I'm still on the list. I'm just waiting for my name to be crossed out. I know they're coming, and I just don't know when. I just wait. Honestly, I'm glad you're still here to listen. If you've ever noticed something weird in the woods, tell me about it in the comments. I read all of them. Hit the like button and subscribe if you want to hear more of these memories. And seriously, watch your back out there. I'll see you in the next one.